Okay, so in the last video, we discussed a couple of methods that you can use for prototyping your level, but the one we are going to use for this project is the modeling toolkit. So to access the modeling toolkit, all we need to do is come up to this select mode dropdown and change it to modeling. So that will give you this little side window here. And for the moment, I'm going to close the content browser just to give us a little bit more space. Okay, so here we have sort of the options that are available to us in the modeling toolkit. We're not going to go over all of these. We're just going to cover the ones that are essential to get our level up and running. So let's add a box model to the level by clicking box. So once you click box, you'll get some contextual menu settings here in this sort of second window here. But if we hover our mouse over our scene, we can see a preview of the box that we're going to add. Now we can change the size and, well, not the shape, but we can change the size of this before we place it into the world by using some of these initialization settings. So we know we want our walls to be 4 meters wide. And if you, let me just pull up, we know that because with our level map that we created, one of these grid units was 4 meters, and it's just a sort of common size to create modular pieces with. So if you ever wonder why I'm choosing the scale I am, it's because I'm referring to my level design documents on the side here. So let's come up here. Let's change our width to 400. Remembering that Unreal Engine uses centimeters for its unit, so a value of 400 centimeters would be 4 meters. For our depth, we want to make this actually quite thin. We want to keep it at 10. And for the height, let's put 400 as well, because we want this wall to be square. And you can see my preview mesh is updating in the viewport as I change these values. So once we are happy with the size of this, we can just click anywhere in the level to drop it in. So now we have this dropped in, and we can continue to click and add walls, but what we're actually going to do is press complete here. Now, let's take a look at how it has actually added this mesh. So let's open our content drawer and dock it in our layout once again. So you'll see if you navigate back up to your content drawer that this new folder has appeared called generated. So let's open this up. And it has my name there. And then if I navigate into that, it has added a static mesh object, and you always know it's a static mesh. Static meshes are coded by this sort of light blue color, but also if you hover over it, at the very top of this pop out, you'll see the name of it and then the type of it. So it's got that box, a crazy string, and then static mesh. So we know it's a static mesh object. So this is why this modeling toolkit is so powerful, is because it allows us to edit static meshes and create static meshes directly in the editor, which we were not able to do in previous versions of Unreal. Now, if you do not like this file structure, this can be customized as well. So because I'm not working on a team, I don't need this to be under like a per user folder, and I don't really like this like file name. So let's delete this from the level first. Let's also delete the asset. We're going to make a new one. And I'm going to delete these folders that it has created for me because I want the folder structure to be different. So in order to change this, all we have to do is come into Edit, Project Settings, and up in the search bar, instead of trying to like navigate through all this content here, because it's a lot, I'm just going to search generated. So down here at the bottom where it says plugins modeling mode, these are the settings we want. So there's some settings for like the location and stuff like that, but here I want to bring your attention to this auto-generated asset path, and you'll see that this was the name of that folder it created. So if we wanted to place our generated meshes under a different folder name, all we have to do is change this. So let's call this, I don't know, mesh gen. You know, you can title this whatever you like. This we can leave. And this one I want to draw your attention to as well. Use per user autogen subfolder. So basically what this is for is if you're working on a team of people, this is why it created a folder with my name on it, because this is enabled. So if I disable this, it is going to save all our new meshes that we create directly under mesh gen without the subfolder. And then this last option here is append random string to name. This is sort of up to you if you want to leave it checked or not. If you'll remember it, our wall piece that we created had a name like box and then a bunch of random letters and numbers. Those random letters and numbers is this setting right here. So you can turn it off if you find it annoying and you want, you know, you don't like to go in and rename things. However, I leave it on as just sort of like a fail-safe. No two static meshes or no two files really at all in Unreal can have the same name. That's why we use the prefixes like SM, because you might have several different types of assets associated with like a single piece or a single concept. So you might have, let's say, for example, you had a static mesh for a phone. But then you also had a audio file that was a phone ring, and you wanted to name them both phone so that you know what object they are associated with. Well, that is why we would have SM as a prefix for the static mesh object, and then you might have, you know, whatever your prefix is for audio. SFX, for example, is a common one for sound effect. You know, and then underscore phone, so that they are both have the name phone, but names are still unique. So I have not run into any issues with this unchecked, but it is possible that if you did try to name two generated meshes the same thing, that you would get some errors. Unreal might crash because, again, this is an experimental feature. So I'm going to leave this checked for now. Okay, we can exit out once we're done with that. So now if I were to make another wall piece, let's click on box. You'll see here that it has remembered my settings from the last box I generated. So when I drag out here, it is the right shape. So let's click to place it, and let's click complete. So now we see that it has created this folder called mesh_gen instead, and there's no per user subfolder, and we just have our box right here. Now I'm going to rename this piece. To rename an object or an asset in Unreal, you can right click and hit rename, or you can hit the shortcut F2. So let's call this wall_4M for 4 meters. So now when we look at this, we know that this is the 4 meter wall piece. Also, as an aside, and again, you do not have to do this if it does not bother you, but I work a lot in Unreal and it bothers me when these objects in the thumbnail preview are not rotated correctly. So I'm going to fix that really quick by coming into settings, enabling this thumbnail edit mode. You'll get this like little blue text here. So now what I can do is just rotate my preview so it's facing the right direction, so I can quickly navigate through and see all my pieces. I know I only have one piece in here right now, but when you have a lot of pieces, it's helpful to have a clear preview of them when you're working. So just click done when you're done, and now you're out of thumbnail edit mode and everything is good to go. So with the modeling toolkit, it also enables us to change the pivots of our static meshes, which was a feature that is new to Unreal. We couldn't do it at all before. In the past, you would have to export this out to a different application, change your pivot, bring it back in, and probably move things around based on the pivot changes. So to change the pivot of this, which I want it to be sort of in the corner here, maybe just on this. Actually, I think I want it to be flush with this edge here, now that I think about it. So to do that, there's lots and lots of options in here, and we'll talk about a couple of them, but again, I just want to focus on the ones that we're going to actually be using to prototype our level, so as not to overwhelm you. But let's come down here, and under transform, there's a couple options here. Let's click on pivot. So now I get this gizmo here that looks different from our normal transform gizmo. So what I can do is I can manually set the pivot here by clicking and dragging these around. Or what I can do is use one of these presets. So if I, like, the pivot was down here, but I needed it to be in the center of the wall, I could hit center and it would snap immediately to the center. I actually want it down in one corner. And the reason I'm talking so much about pivots and why they're important, it has to do with the grid snapping. So we talked about, how to change the grid size, and we talked about how this material conforms to the Unreal Engine grid, and that helps you, keep your walls so there's no gaps in them and have light leaking through and things like that. But in order to properly snap to the grid, it's snapping based on the location of this pivot point. So we need to set the pivot to the proper location, because if you see right now, it's actually spanning two grid squares here, and I want it to line up perfectly with them. So what I'm gonna do is hit, okay. So I've pressed back right here, and that has snapped this pivot point to this side of the wall. So what I can do now is pull this down, and I know it's perfectly flush with this side. And you'll notice that as you do this, this pivot movement respects your grid snapping. So as long as you have grid snapping on, you should be able to snap your pivot exactly where you need it. So, and I'm gonna move it over to this corner so that these pivot lines are lined up with these grid lines, and it's exactly on this corner point. And once I'm done here, I can press accept. And now you'll notice, when I move it, it's still not snapping to the grid correctly. Well, that's because it's using this increment of 10 based off of where it already was. So if you want to snap it absolutely to the world grid, all you have to do is make sure it's selected, right? And then you're gonna hold Control and press the End key on your keyboard. The End key is usually above the arrow keys on the right, next to the Delete key. So you'll see that it snapped exactly, and now it's lined up exactly with these grid lines. So now I have my wall piece set up. So what I can do from here is hold Alt. And you do not have to be in modeling mode. Well, you do have to be in modeling mode for the pivot, but once you're done with the pivot, just for the sake of duplicating these, you do not need to be in modeling mode. So let's hold Alt and drag out a new wall. And so if we look at our level map again, let me just open it. So when we want to start building our room, we know we want to make it up of these wall pieces that are represented by these solid black lines in our top-down map. So based on the level map I drew out, and this is why it's important to draw your map to scale, because it's going to make this stage, this prototyping stage, a lot faster. Because all I have to do now, instead of trying to trial and error how big this room should be, I can just count the grid. So for room 1 here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it needs to be 5 4-meter wall units long on this sort of north wall here. So to determine which direction is, quote, north in Unreal, I mean, there is no true north. The north is whatever you want it to be. This is, a virtual space. But to keep things as clean as possible, what I'm going to do is quickly come into top-down mode. And we can see that these walls are sort of running north to south from the top-down perspective. So to make sure that we are going to go the right way so that when we look at this top-down, it matches this and it's not rotated weirdly. And again, this is personal preference. It can be rotated differently if you want it to be. But to make sure that The final top-down view will line up with this. I'm just going to take our character, not our player start, although we will do that too, but our scale reference character here. I'm just going to take that. I'm going to press E with the character selected. And you'll notice because I have a camera object attached to this actor, when I click on it, I get a little preview of that camera, which is really nice. So I'm going to press E to bring up the rotation tool. And I'm just going to rotate the character so it's facing south to line up with the direction that this character is supposed to be facing. I hope that makes sense. So now when I come back into perspective view, okay, so I know that this is supposed to be north, this is supposed to be south, east, west. I'm going to rotate these walls. And it doesn't really matter where I start placing these walls per se, as we're not actually going to be using this floor for our level. We're going to be making our own floors. But for the time being, just to keep everything, you know, sort of on the same ground plane, we're not going to delete it just yet. So making sure grid snapping's on so that these things line up nicely. Okay, so we have 2. Remember, we counted and we said that they were going to be 5 wide. So let's hold Alt and drag out a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th copy. Now, keep in mind that these walls, all 5 of these pieces, are instances of this same original wall file. So if I wanted to, say, put a grid material on this so that I could better see the scale and get an idea of what's going on, well, I don't have to do that individually on each piece. What I can do, if you remember, is double click on the wall itself in the content browser, and that will open up the static mesh editor. From here, I can change the material slots, or I can change the material underneath the material slots. So let's type in grid. And these are the grids that came with our 3rd-person template. So we can select it to gray and press save, close this out, and now all of our walls have that same gray grid prototype on them. It's pretty cool. So we have our wall piece. Let's look back at our asset list really quick to see what else we need. Okay, let's scroll down to environment assets because that's what we're working with here. So we have a wall. We need a ceiling piece that is also 4 meters. Easy enough. Now you might just be thinking, well, yeah, I could just duplicate it and rotate it, and there's my ceiling. But actually, we want to be creating a new memory reference here for the ceiling to make our lives easier when we go to replace these with final art pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our modeling mode. We're going to click box. We'll see that, of course, it has remembered our dimensions here. And while we could use this and just rotate it, you know, we would have to change probably the pivot again. So instead of doing that, let's give it let's keep the width at 400. Let's give it a depth of 400. And let's change the height to 10. So now, when we hover over the ground, we'll see that it's rotated the correct way. If you like, you can also skip the material application step in the static mesh editor by simply applying the material straight from your initialization settings. Okay, let's click anywhere to place it and hit complete. Okay, so now we have a new memory reference here for our ceiling piece. Let's press F2, and I'm just going to rename it ceiling 4 meters. So it looks like the pivot is again in the center of the mesh, which depending on what you're building, you may want. I, however, am going to change it so that it snaps correctly. Oops. So it snaps correctly to the grid. So I'm going to set it to left, it looks like. And then I'm going to drag the pivot out and make sure it is lined up with these grid lines. Right there. Okay, so now let's just make sure that it's snapped to the world grid by hitting Control and End together. Looks like it is. Yes, it is. Okay. So now we have our ceiling piece here. Very cool. Now, as you start to build this out, you may notice that having everything all the same material gets a little bit confusing. So for the sake of clarity, I'm going to change the material on this. So in order to change, well, I'm not going to change it that much. I just want to change the color basically, but I want to keep the grid lines. So in order to change these pieces to a different color, we need to create a new material for it. So let's first find where this material, this grid that I've applied to it, currently is. So we can look through our folders, but a faster way to find something like that is to select the mesh. Let's open up our details panel, and here we have our materials. We can see we have our prototype grid gray material here applied to it. Now to find this quickly in the content browser, all we have to do is hit this little file with the magnifying glass in it. And that will navigate our content browser directly to that material asset. Now, again, we're going to talk a lot more about materials when we get to creating custom assets and setting them up with their final materials. But for the sake of this prototyping section, we're just going to make copies of this gray and then change the gray to a different color. So to do that, let's right click on this, hit duplicate, and let's change this to where it says gray 1. We're going to change it to, let's say, red. It can be whatever color you like. I'm going to make mine red. So double click to open up this material instance. And again, a material instance is different than a parent material. We're going to talk a lot more about this later, but just make sure that your window looks like this basically when you open it up. If you open up your material and it looks like this, you are editing a parent material. So we're not going to do this at this stage of the prototyping. So make sure it's an instance that looks like this. So to change the color in this, all we have to do is come over here to surface color, click on this color bar, and select a new color for it. You can also change the color of the grid lines if you want to. You can make them white or whatever. I'm going to leave them what they are. Okay, so now we have this red grid material. So what we can do, I'm going to go into my mesh gen where my wall pieces and my ceiling pieces are being saved. I'm going to open up those wall formators. I'm just going to change this prototype grid gray to red as the default. That will change all my walls to this red color. Now, don't forget, you can also change on a per instance basis. So like if I needed one of these walls to be a different color for some reason, but I wanted to use the same mesh, I could still do that. I could just come up here, click on the individual wall in the level editor, and change it to something else. Now, because I've changed the default material here, when I hit the back arrow here, it's going to change my material to whatever I have it set to as the default in the static mesh editor. So basically all I'm going to do now is create some more pieces, like a floor piece and a platform and things like that, using the exact same method that we used here to create these wall pieces and this ceiling. So I'm first gonna give the ceiling a new material, just like we did with the wall. So let's go into materials. Let's duplicate our red one we just made. We can right click and duplicate, or we can highlight it and press Control D. And let's make this one a blue color. Double click to open it. Let's change it to a blue. And for this one, if you want to quickly navigate to a piece without having to like open it up and press this button, I mean, we can certainly do that, but the shortcut for this would be to select it in your level and press Control and B, and that will navigate your content folder to that piece that you have selected. Let's double click to open it, and let's change its default material to blue. Okay, great. So it did not update this piece, which you may be like, why? Me too. We just have to set this to hit the reset button on this, and it'll change it, update it to the, to the default value, which we have just set for it. Okay, so let's continue on making some more of the pieces that we know we're gonna need. Now we know we're gonna need floor pieces, and I do want them to be basically the exact same size as this piece here, but remember that we want to make a separate memory reference for it. Now we could do this by coming into our mesh modeling mode and adding another box and doing basically the same process that we did for the ceiling. But since we already have the shape that we need, we're going to do it in a little bit quicker of a fashion. So what I'm going to do is select the ceiling piece. I'm going to press Alt and drag out to duplicate it down to the floor. So right now, both of these instances are referencing this ceiling 4 meter piece right here, but we can basically split these now using the mesh modeling toolkit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my floor duplicate highlighted. I'm going to come into the mesh modeling mode sidebar here, and under create, I'm going to hit this mesh duplicate button. So nothing has really happened yet, but I get the sort of initialization options in the same way that we had options for initializing a primitive shape. So I'm going to name it something other than ceiling. I'm going to name it floor 4 meters. I am going to keep the output type as from input, which just means it's going to be the same object type as what I duplicated it from. And under handle inputs, I'm going to leave this on delete. And I'm just going to press accept. Okay, so now I have this floor 4 meters and then a bunch of random letters and numbers after it. But it's a separate memory reference. So this is what I was discussing with the append random string to name, is this right here. So even though I only set the name to be floor underscore 4 meters, it appended this random string. And again, this is just a failsafe. In case I had another piece in here named floor underscore 4 meters, it just stops errors from occurring that would be caused by two memory references having the same name. But we can delete this. It's not necessary for this in this particular case. Let's make a separate material for the floor. So basically, I'm going to be color coding this level layout. So I want all the wall pieces to be red. I want all the ceiling pieces to be blue. And let's make another color for our floor pieces. Let's duplicate this. And let's make our floor pieces green. Again, you can make them whatever color you want. Okay, set the green value here. Looks good. Press save. You can close that out. You can close that out. And the last thing we need to do is open up our floor static mesh defaults editor and change this. We can search through all the materials we have in our project by using the search bar here. So I've just searched green. We have one material with the word green in the name, and there we go. Okay, and the last thing we need to do here is, because we already had this placed, we just need to reset that value. All right, so this is all the pieces I need to actually get started. I'm going to need a few more pieces before the prototype is complete, but we will sort of cross that bridge when we come to it. We're going to pause the recording here, and when we come back, we're gonna just start building out our level, at least for the first pass of our level. So I will see you in the next video.